Guys, welcome to part one of Project 360. So this is going to be a multi-part series. It's going to be as many videos as it takes basically to complete this. So hopefully, you guys get something useful out of it, or if it's at least entertaining, right? What we're going to do is we're going to cover this pile of parts I've got behind me on the table. It's probably a couple $1,000s worth of parts. And what I have here is everything you can imagine that would be replaced on this car, for the most part, service-wise. I've got brake lines, okay? Brake lines on these cars are a wear item. It's a rubber hose. It's gonna crack, it's gonna deteriorate, it's gonna flex. This car's 25 years old basically at this point. We've got stainless braided ones, the Stop Tech ones. They're not very expensive, guys. They're about 45, 50 bucks for the front and 45 or 50 bucks for the rear. I also have cooling system parts here. So I have a thermostat with gaskets, okay? I've got a brand new water pump here. The water pump is not obviously going out on that car, but they do come OEM with a plastic impeller. Plastic impellers, they can disintegrate, come apart in pieces in your cooling system. Not a fun thing. And then having to fish that out with the coolant pipes that run all the way down the center of the car up to the front radiators, that sucks. I've also got a heat exchanger. Basically what happens is if you don't change the coolant out, the insides of that thing corrode, and then you've got coolant and gearbox oil mixing, and it's a literal dumpster fire. You have to flush so many gallons of coolant, flush everything all out. It's not fun. So I'm trying to avoid that as well. Since I don't know the history of this car with coolant changes or any records, I'm just gonna do that as well. Obviously it comes with intake manifold gaskets because they're recommending you pull the intake off. To go ahead and replace it. You don't have to do that, guys. You can actually replace those heat exchangers by going through the service panel behind the rear seats or from the backside. You can get at it a couple different ways. But I'm just gonna pull the intake off because it came with the gaskets, and I'm gonna replace those because, well, it helps me avoid any weird drivability problems that may arise with old, crusty 25-year-old intake gaskets. I've also got, like I said, timing belt, Hill Engineering bearings, the tensioner bearings, brand new tensioners, spark plugs, oil filter with the plugs, gaskets, oil tank gasket as well, valve cover gaskets with all the seals, pollen filter obviously, cam seal. I am hoping when I get in here, I'm gonna see the exhaust cam variators with the green dots on. That's the updated variators on this motor. Some of you guys know this, but the earlier ones, they basically had a problem where they would crack and they could basically break off and throw your timing belt and basically need a motor at that point because it's pretty catastrophic. Depending on what RPMs you were spinning when that happened, I don't see the stamp on the cylinder head on the passenger side, like right by the valve cover where you can kind of see it. I don't see it. So I hope it's done. We'll find out. The belts had to have been changed on this motor at least once based on the date codes that we found in there, which was 07, which is insane, by the way. Even if you gave it that leeway for, parts sitting on the shelf and having an extra year and a half or something on the belt, that still puts it pretty freaking old. We also have a battery as well. The battery in there is because there is a battery light on my dash. Now, I know that replacing the battery in there is not gonna fix the battery light on the dash. It's generally because of the alternator taking a crap. I think what I'm gonna do is pull it out and I'm gonna rebuild it. We're gonna send that off. So when I first get into this car, that'll be one of the first things I take off with the belts when I do the timing belt. While I'm in there doing the alternator, by the way, I have a battery tender, okay? And there's already a battery tender in this car and it's not a very good one. And I want to kind of unify them between the Viper, the Maserati, and the 360. So they all use the same connector. It's all the same thing. I can just kind of move the cars around the garage and it's no big deal. BMC air filters, engine mounts. Engine mounts, generally they failed just because of age and also abuse too, and the driving habits of whoever owned the car. Generally, when you see this rubber here touching the metal flange there at the bottom, and it's kind of smashed or squished, that's when you know they're kind of toast. Also, if you see cracks in the rubber, it's better just to replace them. I also have a gearbox mount that I have to replace. I don't have that yet, that's coming in the mail. I also have a single DIN CarPlay stereo. We also obviously have accessory belts. This is the timing belt tensioner tool for those Hill Engineering bearings on the timing belt. There's specialty tools that I'm gonna need for this, and I don't really feel like going and paying $300, $400, $500 for these tools. We'll cover all that stuff when we get there. Point is, there's gonna be some 3D printed tools. Anyway, we'll cover that. Let's go ahead and shuffle these cars around and let's get this started and get this Ferrari up on, at least the wheels in the rear up on ramps, so that I can go ahead and take off the Undertray and start draining out the oil and the coolant entirely out of the system, and we can kind of start taking panels off and prep this thing so that we can start tearing it down. Unfortunately, guys, the battery is dead on this 360. So what we're probably gonna have to start with before I can even do the switcheroo here with the Gran Turismo in the 360 is I'm gonna have to swap out the battery. And then while we're in there, we might as well just do the battery tender. So I think we're gonna start with that first, swap the cars, and then we'll proceed with draining the oil, draining the coolant, taking the undertray off and all that stuff. Battery out, and I just came down here to look at the pigtail for the battery tender. Right here on the positive terminal of the battery cable, there is a fused little socket here, okay? And looks like there is a 15 amp fuse sitting here. If I'm not mistaken, and if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that has to do with the charging system, and it has something to do with the alternator. I got to go back and look at the service manual and figure that out and see if that's actually what it is. It's been so long, so I don't remember. That might be my problem with my alternator. So that might have just saved me a couple $100. Once we got in here, you know, someone's been in here, obviously, because they installed this. This is the pigtail for the battery tender that we are replacing, which is a Schumacher. It's got some issues. So we're basically just gonna flat out replace that. Like I said, we're gonna try to unify it between all the cars, the Maserati, the Viper, and the 360, so they all use the same battery tender, so I can just shuffle cars around the garage. One thing we did just fix, because I did find some stuff here, was I zip tied a few things here, basically to keep these hoses from rubbing on these clamps here. To keep it off of this. Over time, that stuff's just gonna rub holes and things, and it's gonna cause problems. And I just noticed that straight away, so I was like, well, let's just take care of that really quick. Take a look at the AC, the high and low side. There's no caps on those. And normally, you have caps on them that have rubber O-rings inside the caps to keep anything that leaks past the Schrader valves inside somewhat. There aren't any. Another thing I noticed was when I took this panel off here, this huge panel that covers everything, maybe it's on the later ones, I'm not exactly sure, but I was pretty sure that there was some weather barrier there. Like normally it's like a white foam, kind of very thin, like kind of like the same stuff you would find inside your door panels. And maybe that changed on later ones. I don't remember. It's been so long. This one does seal. It's got a rubber seal on the back side of it, as you can see here. You know, so it's not like it's not gonna seal. But take out that pigtail. Our pigtail for our battery tender is a little bit shorter. If I could find out where I placed it, I have no idea where I put it. It's much shorter. Point is, I think I'm gonna take this one out, seal this all up so that it's, you know, we don't really have to come back in here. And I'm probably gonna hook it up here in the passenger side because I can tuck this back up underneath in the car. And I can basically just let the battery tender sit on the floor inside the car. Some people like that, some people don't. That's just how I'm gonna do it. For me, that's ease of use. I don't have to pop the trunk every time. The doors are more accessible because that's, you're gonna get in and out of the car. So it makes sense to do it that way, in my eyes anyway. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna take this out. We're gonna go ahead and stick the new battery in and we're gonna wire in the new pigtail for the battery tender and see if we can get this thing started and then swap the Maserati and the 360 and let's get to work on this thing. All right, so we got the 360 and the Maserati swapped around. I think that the alternator issue is solved, potentially. Putting that fuse in, I don't see the battery light on the dash anymore, so I gotta still check the output of the alternator to make sure everything's good, but I think it's fixed. The other thing we gotta do is we need to get the tail end of this car up in the air so that I can basically get underneath and get access to all the fasteners for the undertray so that I can go ahead and take that off so I have access to everything underneath the car. This will be for draining all the fluids like oil, coolant, stuff like that. Probably getting access to like timing belt related stuff, also to lock the flywheel in place so that I can go ahead and break the crank pulley bolt loose and all that other stuff. And we'll get into all that later when we start doing the timing belt. But I use these. So I have these Rhino ramps, and basically these are good for something obscene like 12 or 16,000 pounds or something like that. These are the ones that are rated for the truck. They're about $60, $65. And I'll link to those in the description below if you guys want to pick up a pair of those. It's probably your simplest way to get this car up in the air to be able to access the undertray and get at some of that stuff. Because as you know, like the way that you lift this car up, it's kind of a pain in the butt with the undertray that's on there and how they put the undertray on the bottom. The other thing is I have lift pucks, and I have shown you guys those previously for the Maserati. They look like this and they fit in the frame. What I did is I modified and I chopped this nub or this part off so that instead we have essentially what looks like basically a hockey puck, more or less. You can get a hockey puck. You can use anything you want, technically. I would just use something rubbery because it's insulated. It's not going to damage the car. I'll link to this so that you guys can get at this as well on Amazon or wherever else. Let's go ahead and get this thing up in the air. So before you guys ever lift one of these things up, I forgot to kind of tell you this, but wheel chalk this thing. I've got one right here, and I'll try to link to those in the description as well. But you can put the e-brake on this thing, but the e-brake is for the rear wheels, right? So like you're lifting the rear of the car up, your front wheels are not gonna stop. They're just gonna roll. So your car will start creeping forward if you're not careful. Better safe than sorry, right? It's a nice car, you don't wanna mess it up. So throw some wheel chocks in front of the front wheels before you start lifting the back end of this car up, and you should be good to go. So here we are. What we're gonna do is take that under tray off. I'm gonna take these off as well, these panels on the sides, so we can see everything on the sides. And then obviously we're gonna take a bunch of this stuff out here. I will probably leave the exhaust in if we can for the most part. That's for another video. We'll eventually probably upgrade the exhaust at some point, but for now, it's maintenance. This thing has to run tip-top shape before I can start modifying or doing anything, fun to it, basically. So air boxes will come out, coolant tank will go away. We may eventually probably refinish this tank here, the oil tank, because it's, as you can see, it's starting to crack and come off and look kind of like garbage. Our valve cover gaskets, you can kind of see in here. It's kind of nasty, both sides. Here's what I was talking about. On the cylinder head, we're supposed to see a stamp. I don't know if you guys can pick this up or see it, but there's like a little loop there. We're supposed to see it there to see if the variator's been done. I don't know if they have or haven't. Hopefully we find out some good news when we tear it down, but this is what we're working with right now, guys. So let's jump into it. Okay, so you probably saw that I pulled out this filter here and I was cleaning it off with brake cleaner and I didn't put it back in. So there's a specific reason I didn't put it back in. So if you take a look, it's basically worn through the mesh screen there. Also, there are some little grooves or slits or cuts. I don't know if the camera's gonna pick this up really well or not, but in the O-ring. And so initially I was gonna just replace the O-rings until I saw this at the bottom. And then just decided, well, might as well just replace it. Part number for that, by the way, 177130. It runs about $250, so it's not cheap, but it's part of the oiling system. It's a filter that's in line there, so you kind of can't cheap out on something like that. So we're gonna wait for that to come in the mail, and we're gonna swap that back in and replace it. Also, we gotta still drain the coolant on this thing, so let's get started with that. Okay, so as you saw, we got some coolant basically out of the front end of the motor. There's still coolant in the block for sure. There's still coolant in the front of the radiators, especially since the car is up on ramps like this. It's slanted this way. So all the coolant's kind of sitting in those pipes that run up the center of the car, and then obviously in the radiators as well. We're not gonna drain the stuff out of the radiator just yet because we wanna do all the maintenance on the motor first. I wanted to get all the coolant out so that basically what I could do was take the water pump off without it just dumping coolant everywhere all over the floor. This will kind of help. It's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna get a good chunk of it out of there. My hope also is that it got most of the coolant flowed downward out of the heat exchanger, hopefully, or at least a decent amount. Later on down the road, what we're actually gonna do is I have this silicone radiator hose kit, as you can see, and we are gonna replace all of the radiator hoses and everything for the cooling system with silicone hoses so that we don't have to worry about the rubber drying out, cracking, or basically failing on us at any point. It should be all brand new basically, so we should be good to go. So for now, guys, I think that's gonna wrap it up. What we're gonna do in the next videos, we'll start disassembling probably the motor. We didn't really get to it in this one, but we'll start taking out probably the air boxes and everything and tearing everything down and prepping it and getting it ready so that we can take the timing belt covers off, and we'll take those off probably and probably one of the seats out of the interior and the panel in the back so we can get to the front end of the motor. And then we'll kind of continue from there on our quest to bring this thing back up to snuff so that we can go ahead and drive it around without having to worry about anything failing or having problems. Guys, thanks for sticking with me and watching this if you made it this far. If you like this content and you're at least learning something, or you at least enjoy it, please give a thumbs up, like, subscribe, guys, hit the notification bell, and I will catch you on the next one.